Okay, there we are. Okay, that's fine. So I'll start recording now. Okay, thanks.
Okay, so welcome everybody to the Climate Change CDC for, sorry, I thought I'd lost you then. So first item on the agenda then is apologies for absence.
No apologies, Chair.
Okay. Second item on the agenda, disclosures of personal and prejudicial interests. Okay. Councillor Rice, you have your hand up.
Yes, I'm just going to declare an interest because we're talking about local food and production of local products. I've got my own company which is in the beverage business in the local area. Okay.
Okay, thank you. And item 3 then would be to approve and sign the minutes of the previous meeting. So this was held on the 16th of January. Somebody could approve the minutes, please. So I'll take that from Councillor Doyle, and then I'll have somebody to second, and that's Councillor Rice, and then all in favour will be 1, 2, 3. Yeah. Okay. Fourth item on the agenda then is our item of the day. So sustainable food. We have our lead officer, Jeff Bacon, going to provide us with a verbal report on this. And just hopefully those members have had a little bit of time to go through the report attached. So views are going to be sought from committee members in terms of or in relation to developing a Swansea Council sustainable food policy and then supporting the wider Swansea County with regard to sustainable food. So I'll hand over to Jeff, and then we'll open the room up then for questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Chair. We're in a very similar situation as to the last report that came forward about the renewable energy policy, where we are really seeking the views of CDC in terms of developing a future policy. So whilst there's a lot of information in this report, hopefully you've had a chance to have a look and digest some of it, as I've done this afternoon, because it's written by Rachel, so there's a lot in there, so don't expect me to be an expert on content. But we really want your views because we have to establish a food policy. Now, there is a lot to take in, so we tried to break it down into sort of two very distinct topics, two work packages that Jane and I will take you through. So I'll pick up the first bit with regards to the council sustainable food policy, and then Jane will talk about establishing how we can support the wider county. But I want to be very clear because there are some potentially contentious issues because you're talking about a whole industry here in terms of the wider support for the community, that there's nothing established, there's nothing written down in terms of tablets of stone. We're not saying this is the way the policy is going to be, but we do need your view. So it is important that the CDC actually sort of responds, if at all possible, either during the session or follow up afterwards. Happy to take any views in writing, and there'll be more information and more work. We're looking at sort of having some consultative groups going forward over the next year or so. Now, as part, this is clearly part of the net zero ambition. Welsh Government have helpfully consulted on their Food Wales Bill, which is coming to the point of being established in law. It's a very weighty document. It's an Appendix 1. Please have a look, but it will set out some specific actions that we have to undertake as a public body. It establishes food goals, and those food goals are primary and secondary. They're in the report, and they're also in Appendix 2, which is where we set out what we think a draft policy for the council could look like. Now, we have to take reasonable steps as a public body to advance those food goals. Welsh Government are going to establish a food commission, which will be looking at monitoring activity and promoting and facilitating the advancement of these food goals by public bodies. Welsh ministers have to prepare and publish a national food strategy, but we as public bodies have to make and publish a local food plan within 2 years of the bill becoming adopted. So, as I say, we're at the start of this journey. We just want to make sure that we're talking about the right subject areas when it comes to policy and establishing that local food plan. The primary food goal is clearly straightforward. It's about, as it's stated in the report, the provision of affordable, healthy and economically, environmentally and socially sustainable food for the people of Wales, which is something that none of us could possibly argue with. It's broken down into secondary food goals around economic well-being, health and social well-being effectively as well, education, the environmental side of things, and also food waste. So there is a lot of activity needed to cover those particular secondary food goals to achieve that primary food goal. Now, the way we've tried to attack it, for want of a better description, is the draft policy. Well, I'm just trying to get it up now in terms of how we think we can start to break it down into more areas to investigate. We've had discussions with colleagues talking about some specific areas that we think we should initially say will be something that's readily achievable. We ensure all food is purchased and consumed as part of internal council arrangements. They have to be safe and respect regulation, because if you're not careful, local food sourcing could lead to difficulties when it comes to safety that have been well publicised in other areas. We have to encourage products that are traded fairly through the supply chain. We would have to consider areas of land for growing opportunities, and we encourage menus with lower carbon footprint. Nothing more prescriptive than that for the time being. We will cover in corporate contracts issues around welfare, animal welfare, nutritional value, health and safety, etc., which comes into the issue of obviously food being safe. And we need to make sure that due diligence is applied on all direct food purchases. There'll be an additional piece of work that Jane will come on to in a minute that will talk about the wider county agenda. And all this then will feed into that food plan when we have to actually start to write that document within the next couple of years or so. We welcome your thoughts on that area. Before we get into that, perhaps, if I hand over to you, Jane, if that's all right, to talk about the second area, which is looking at the wider county and what we've done with SEF as part of our environmental partnership. Is that okay?
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. What we did, as Jess said, is split the work, and as part of the environmental partner framework, we commissioned SEF to do a very high level first review of the landscape of food in Swansea. So the first phase is the information gathering, because we wanted to know and try and gain as full a picture as what's actually happening in Swansea as possible. We're aware that there's all sorts of things going on, and so we commissioned a report, and this will hopefully feed into this action plan. So we asked initially for the report to cover things like the public and a summary of the sort of active food focused groups around Swansea and what their aims and objectives are. Looking particularly at food poverty, so that would cover all the food banks and that sort of thing. The sustainable communities and learning about food and how to grow food, that sort of thing. And then community initiatives, including Boyd Abertawe. Councillor Alison Pugh provided the written backing for the Tackling Poverty perspective for their bid to the Welsh Government, and they were very successful in getting that money. Nearly £100,000, a third of which is going to support an ongoing officer, and 2/3 of it will go on supporting community projects across Swansea. We also asked them to look at how the council may support farms, land and estates, but we are quite aware of the fact that actually that this is limited within this report, and I'll go on to that in a second. We also wanted to have a view on Welsh businesses and industry. So obviously we have quite strong ties with some of the small local businesses through the Swansea Food Partnership. So we wanted to focus on identifying who the key players were for the medium and larger industries, but not necessarily within the time frame of this report to have any huge detail on that. So the report itself will covers the national context and the regional context and the need for sustainable farming, for nature and for climate change. It goes into what Boyd Abertawe actually, as a key stakeholder, is doing at the moment. and has plans to do with this funding. We've identified Boyd Abertawe as a key stakeholder because they are obviously a group that is very interested, very proactive. They've got this funding. We are aware that obviously for work across the wider Swansea Council wouldn't necessarily have vast resources to be able to do things, but we would be able to support others to do that work. Then we also looked at local community initiatives, so that was actually covering all the food poverty, the community growing, including allotments, the cooking skills, the education, and also the food waste and the packaging aspects of things. And you know, there's a lot of food waste initiatives and refill stations available across Swansea now, and looking at is the whole sort of sustainable aspect of food purchasing and that sort of thing as well. It did cover a little bit about the farming and the land availability, but we are very aware that this is the limitation of this report. This was due to the fact that we have very few links with the farming sector as it is at the moment. Nature Conservation have a few links that they're going to help us with, and we note the response of Councillor Stevens prior to today's meeting for the organisations that should be included in further work on this. And that's basically where we've got to at the moment. I think the report is quite rounded as is, and it was pulled together very, very quickly. And we're looking now to where we need to go and looking for direction as to where we might need to go to commission further reports. Thank you.
Chair, if I can just quickly finish off,
Yeah,
I think
sorry.
to their
There's a bit of a
credit.
delay with my mic then. Sorry. Yeah, Jeff, if you want to come back.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, to their credit, Seth have done quite a good job in a short space of time in terms of pulling together all the information. I think I was quite pleased with the extent of what they managed to capture in terms of the smaller and local organisations who were very heavily involved in the food process. I think it is right to say that it needs to be more rounded in terms of the farming community. Now that is right. They're very heavily involved, and they're a very heavily involved industry and community that we have to make sure are so we don't concentrate too much on the small stuff, because that won't basically do the job. Local is local, isn't it? It isn't necessarily just around a corner. It's within the county boundaries. I think we are talking about having further workshops with the various groups. I think Boyd Abertawe will be very important to that, because they are leading on the wider county initiative. And we will feed into that through not only our more localised policy, but we have a role to play in waste, for example. But our influence on waste is going to be very different from our ability to actually deal with waste. So that's part of their role. It'll be helpful to us in terms of the net zero ambitions, but there's only so much we can do in terms of driving that agenda. So as I say, a lot of work still to be done. If you haven't had a chance to sort of wade your way through the report, please do so, and I'd welcome further discussions. But we will be coming back, either directing how a workshop can happen or perhaps directly to this group with others, so we can report on further update, because I think this is certainly something we have a role to play in terms of creating emerging policy for the county. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that, Jeff. I think I think thanks for putting that report together. I know that in terms of timing, it was you put it together in as quick as you could with the time that you had. I know that it's been mentioned a couple of times, isn't there, that there's the report doesn't cover everything, and it's it is in its draft, and this is the idea behind development, isn't it, and policy development. So we know that further work needs to be done, and I think I am in favour, I think, of creating maybe some workshops or working group around this to further this discussion, especially as you mentioned there, Jane, about you've got a few links with the farming sector, so I'm wondering whether if we open the door a little to external partners and stakeholders, so the farming organisations. I believe we have a food coordinator, is it Jack Joseph? Maybe he can be involved. The rural champion, Boyd Abertawe, as you've mentioned. Get together and see if we could get a working group together. I think would be a really good idea. Before I bring others in, I think there's a correction to add, isn't there, to the report? I'm not sure if it's already been done. I think Shepherd's in Penmine is not Shepherd's Fruit and Veg. I think that was noted, wasn't it? There we are. So if that could be corrected on that.
Yeah, it's
report.
in the SEF report. It refers to Penmane, Shepherd's in Park Mail, and it's not. It's another organisation.
There we are. That's fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Shepherd's, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anybody want to come in? Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask or anything they want to add? I know it's a big report, but just wondering.
I mean,
Councillor Hopkins?
I did have my hand up, but for some reason it went back down and then I couldn't get it back up. Sorry, I don't know whether the technical problems. Look, I clearly would endorse that. I think, pardon the pun, but this is very much a policy that will grow with us. I think as time goes by, particularly as legislation itself will change with Welsh Government. I think we do need to prepare for it, and I think workshops would be certainly a good way forward on that, right? Because it is something we're all learning from, and I totally endorse that way going forward. There is a lot to do, but there are some, obviously, particularly with Brexit and the supply chain, we need to be, I would like to see as much localism as possible, wherever we can, trying to cut the carbon miles particularly on, but it's got to be affordable and nutritious as well. So, yeah, there's a lot to be done, and as Chair, I totally would support, if you, in your role as Chair, whether you could take further evidence from other groups as well, because there are lots of people with lots of expertise in this area, not just in the farming community, you know, as well. There are, if we open the farming community, then we must take evidence on it from elsewhere as well. So I would totally endorse that.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Right, Len, Councillor Doyle.
Thank you. I just wanted to flag up a couple of issues to do with allotments, in the sense that a couple of years ago, perhaps 5 years ago, there was a piece of work done by, I think, what were called PDCs then, regarding food poverty and allotment type work. And a lot of councillors that were on the committee at the time came forward with the fact that there were pieces of land in the awards that was council owned, not utilised, and they'd inquired about whether they could have allotments or some sort of community growing project on the land. But whichever council department owned the land always seemed to come up with some sort of reason why it couldn't be used for allotments. Usually that there might be some sort of use for the land in the next period of time, and they didn't want to give the land over to something and then have to, if you like, take the allotment land back because they wanted to use it for something. And at the time, the feeling was that the council was putting more obstacles in the way of growing projects and allotments. And I just wondered, you know, where are we with that sort of thing? Because I think that we should be encouraging, where possible, land to be used for community growing or allotments. And at the time, it was sort of disappointing to hear all of these sorts of issues being brought forward by councillors, which were effectively, can I use the term, council bureaucracy, almost blocking developments. And in some cases, we had a meeting, I think there was some community growers came and they said, we wouldn't mind if we could have a piece of land for, say, 2 years, we could do something with it, we could grow stuff on it, and we do so on the understanding that it might have to go back to the council for some other use. I just wondered where we were on that sort of thing, because as far as I'm aware, there haven't been new allotments allocated for some time. Thank you. Sorry if I went on a bit there.
No, it's okay, Councillor Doyle. Jeff, you put your hand up, so I'll
Yeah, I was going
I'll bring you in.
to volunteer as being the bureaucratic red tape Jobsworth who's often stands in the way of these things, to be honest with you. So it is notoriously difficult, Councillor Doyle, to get these off the ground. And we're not alone in this. It's probably every authority in the country has the same sort of struggles, and I've been very involved in various groups to try and think of a way of actually short-circuiting the process. It's undoubtedly part of this piece of work. If you have a look at the CEF report, it does cover allotments, and the fact we've got, I think there's 17 in Swansea, 16 of those are council owned, and they're now self-managed by the allotment by the plot holders, and you continue to have long waiting lists. So there's obviously a desire for these sites. We can identify land that can be readily used for allotments. It's support that the associations and the groups need in order to get forward and actually be able to self-manage. That's the struggle and the issue we often come across. It's part of this piece of work. Seth will pick it up, Boyd Abutab will pick it up, and fingers crossed will enable a policy to come forward on it. Jack, is it Joseph or Jones? Latter, Jones, is it? Has been Joseph. I'm looking at James, he's nodding, shaking their head. Yeah. Jack Joseph, right? He's been supportive in particular inquiries we've had over the last couple of years. I don't know whether any of those have ever come to fruition, quite frankly, because they are so incredibly difficult. And we know they're difficult because it's getting the groups set up, getting the site set up, getting the whole community happy with the fact that someone else is taking a parcel of land and managing it. But this is undoubtedly a piece of work that will form part of the policy, so we know what we're doing, because at the moment we're all sort of pointing at each other about, well, that's them or him or her. Now we need to get that policy sorted. So it's important as part of the wider if you like mixed economy of the local food growing, but I think sometimes it can be distraction because you spend a lot of time talking about the very local level. And we need to make sure we got the whole picture sorted first. So yeah, it's part of this. Welcome any input. If we can get at least that bit off the ground, I think it'll be a big way forward.
Thank you for that, Jeff. Councillor Stewart, Councillor Rice.
Thank you. I think there's 3 different things that would be interesting to look at here in the policy going forward. First one is what I'd call waste to supply. So basically where food waste can become a supply for the growing of future food or for the production of energy. And there's a couple of examples of that out there. I mean, I mentioned in a previous CDC about endocycle, the idea of using food waste to feed soldier flies, which will then make fertilizer for the local market, which is cheaper than the fertilizer they might be able to access, which would help local farms and other growers. And I think then, there's the issue of what do we do with local food provision in the area? And we've got lots of situations where there's local food providers or small businesses or even larger businesses that have got food waste or waste that they would like to actually turn into productive food for other people to eat. So it's kind of looking at the examples of the Milan project, which I think I've spoken about before, which is being able to share food and being able to get that kind of fresh food out to the food banks and other food shares that there are around the local authority, and I think that's a good thing. I think the third area is something I know that Councillor Lewis and I have spoken about before in another medium, and that's about being able to get local providers to be able to provide to local authorities, which is quite hard when you look at South Wales, because it's quite a big task for a very small provider or a local provider to become an accredited member of South Wales and to be able to use the sales platform there. And it's not an impossible task, but it's something that maybe local providers could be assisted with or given advice on, so that we can keep the food miles down by local food going into the system and being bought by the public sector or by other large purchasers, who are using public money.
Mm.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Hopkins. You're on mute there.
Sorry, I got some right IT problems. Yeah, believe me. Anyway, what I would say, the last point, if I could, Councillor Rice, if you've got any list of any individuals, particularly in any chain, not just food chain, of individuals that would want to sell to Swansea and get on that platform, any advice on the procurement side certainly would would like to help if I could. There are give some assistance, whatever we can, to get more and more local people on the chain. That's certainly an ambition for me from procurement side. I know for many years we've been into working as a consortium with our food waste at the present time, where it do go to energy, and it is part of a consortium where I also believe that they make fertilizer out of it, and I think there is more work that could be done going forward. But I think reduction of that waste, food waste, would be probably the best thing we could do, and make sure that less waste is wherever possible. But no, my main purpose here is if there's anything I can do to assist local businesses get on the supply chain, please let me know.
Thank you, Councillor Hopkins. Jeff, is that a legacy hand or is that?
No, I just put my hand up very quickly then. I think on a couple of points that Councillor Rice raised, that local food provision and the Milan project idea is one that certainly Boyd Abitabi will get involved with, because if you look at the CEF report, a lot of that is captured in terms of those local networks. But there is obviously a huge amount of work to make those connections, but that's what we'd expect them to help and support on. On procurement, obviously future work programme, Chris Williams is going to be coming along to the next meeting, so that will be the time, I think, to helpfully mention that. But that the specific issue about using local suppliers, it's absolutely the right thing to do if we can, but there are two critical issues. One is sustainability of that supply network, that supply chain, sorry, and the second is safety. And that's what our procurement colleagues were, again, perhaps slightly over bureaucratic in their jobs with you, but I 100% get why, because there are some potential issues, in particular when you're looking at food, that you've got to be very, very careful about. So it is, you are right, it's how you get them on that Sale to Wales route, how you make sure that they are local suppliers that we can tap into, and how we can support them to do that. And I think that's something for next month, linking into this. So there is, there's almost some sense and synergy about what we're talking about here, isn't it? So that will be very helpful, and I'll make sure I sort of flag that with Chris Williams before he comes along, so he's forewarned.
Thank you, Jeff. Councillor Lawson, put your hand up.
Thank you. Yeah, my comment is also really on the theme of food waste as well. I'm sure I'm not the only person who's been very frustrated being at a function or a buffet, seeing a lot of food left over at the end and asking what's going to happen to it, and being told it's going to go straight in the bin. And sometimes I've even seen this including things like sealed packets of crisps and pieces of fruit that don't really have the same hygiene and health and safety issues as some other foods. So I was wondering if maybe as part of this data gathering, it might be useful to make some kind of fact sheet for businesses on what the exact protocols for hygiene are in terms of recycling, reusing, redonating food that has been offered out or that has been part of a function, which parts can be recycled for charitable use, and also making them aware that it can also be composted if it can't be recycled for consumption, and that maybe making some kind of help for businesses, fact sheet, myth busting sheet as well might go alongside the audit of food waste as well.
Yeah, good.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Lawson. So, Councillor Anderson, you popped your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Kel. Just reiterating what Councillor Hopkins said. Obviously, food waste comes under my portfolio, and yes, I'd love to be. Most of our food waste goes for energy, transported up to Newport, I think it is, and converted into energy. But I am certainly willing to sit down and work our way through with the CDC if we can come up with better methods.
My apologies for the delay. For some reason, it takes ages for my mic to come back on when I moved it. I'm just noticing there's a couple of maybe legacy hands. I'm not sure. I can still, no, everybody's popped their hands down. So sorry, Sarah, you have your hand up.
Hi, Kelly. Yeah, it's such an, I despair. I mean, we have so much waste. We get given stuff for our warm hubs from the Marks and Spencers, from the co-op, vast amount of stuff. And it's getting it, you know, you either end up defrosting bread for the soup kitchens or whatever, or giving it away on the day, which we do successfully. We all share it around. I mean, I put it out and say, come on, have some, and it's not helping our waistlines any, but you know, but it's good for it not to end up in you know, bins or anything. But it does make me think there's going to come a point where we're going to have to cook. They're going to have to be a lot more frugal with what they actually do. And that's the big problem, isn't it? Because you don't want people to go to a shop at the end of the day and there not be anything there. But on the other hand, all this waste is terrible and it can't be good. And I just don't know how the stores are going to deal with that. And it really keeps me awake at night, because I think it's great for us to have this pile of stuff to give out to people, but on the other hand, it's not sustainable at all. Wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And Councillor Lewis, you've popped your hand up as well.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do. It strikes me listening to the discussion in the meeting this evening that it could potentially be a very wide agenda that goes beyond the team that are leading on this and drifts into other departments. For example, I was chairing the Public Service Board recently, where they were talking about tackling obesity, and the Health Board had come to that meeting to discuss that. And that inevitably drifted into the lack of cooking skills that people have now, and being able to cook a healthy budget meal and having the tools to be able to do that at home as well. But that brings me then back to food waste, because when people are cooking at home, if they only buy what they absolutely need and then make best use of that, then that reduces their food waste, and everybody can contribute to this net zero agenda. So I'm not trying to make this strategy too complicated, but just realising that there are other policies and strategies which will clearly feed, if you pardon the pun, feed into this and will be closely linked. So I'm sure that the committee will no doubt discuss this as well, but I think this is something that you could argue touches on every cabinet portfolio and every part of the council.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. I believe Jeff, your hand went up next.
No, do you want to pick up the Councillor Keaton and I can pick up?
I'm just.
Thank
Right,
you.
sorry,
It was just to come back to Andrew, and yes, I'm painfully aware that we're feeding people who can ill afford to buy anything else croissants and chocolate delights of pastries and everything. It's not good. It's not good. And they look at the vegetables and go, I don't know if I can cook those, because they're worried about the gas or using the energy to do it. It's just an awful situation to be in. But when, in some ways, although we're helping short term, we're not helping long term with their health. Thank you. On to you, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say this is really helpful, because you're helping us to highlight some of the areas that you think are a priority that are captured in the bill as primary and secondary priorities. A lot of it is going to be picked up in terms of the piece of work the Board Abbotawi will undoubtedly be trying to lead on, but clearly it's going to be beyond their remit as well, because when you start talking about PSB role and we talk about health role, at the very outset we can start pointing directions that it is everyone's agenda, like the whole net zero agenda is anyway. So we can at least try and sort of highlight some of the key issues that are being picked up here in terms of what the priorities of this group are. No, that's generally very helpful.
There we go. And Angela, I believe you've got your hand up as well.
Sorry, just to echo what Councillor Lewis and Councillor Keaton mentioned, because even in the education scrutiny, we've been talking about cooking workshops and everything, so it does sort of feed into everything, and just educating people on cooking from basic rather than ready meals and pre-chopped everything else. Thank you.
Okay, so there's no more hands up. Does that mean then if anybody else has anything else they'd like to add at this point? Sarah, do you want to come in? It's okay.
Just to quickly say, though, we've got to be careful when we say it start to go down the line of, well, if they knew how to cook food properly. It comes from, sometimes it comes from a level of entitlement that we know we've got our kitchens, we've got our pots and pans, we've got our gas or electric. Some people are in such a hellish position at the moment. They haven't got that. So although I'm quick enough to say feeding them croissants is not a good thing, but long term, but short term, it's just filling stomachs. And, you know, you can give them all the vegetables you like, but if they can't cook them because they literally can't cook them, where are we? Sorry, I'm going. Thank you.
It's fine. It's really important, the issues that you raise in there, Councillor Keaton. So, Councillor Lawson.
Yeah, similarly to what Councillor Keaton was just saying, I think another thing that I've heard is reports from disability groups to say that another area where there can be difficulties for people taking ingredients from scratch, you know, if vegetables need a lot of cutting, a lot of processing, sometimes with people that have limited mobility or arthritis in their hands, things like that, then it's just too difficult. And so those pre-packaged meals are what they need, but of course they're less nutritious and they're less environmentally friendly. So we have to maybe look at solutions for people who have those sort of limitations, as well as the ones that Councillor Keaton was describing.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Sorry, Councillor O'Connor, is that a legacy hand that you have there from earlier? Or did you want to come back in?
Yeah, sorry, legacy hand.
Okay. Okay, does anybody else want to add anything into the discussion there? Just checking. I can't see hands up, you see, unless you're on my screen, so I'm just double checking. Okay, there we are. So Jeff, and I know that Jeremy's taking notes of all of the points that have been raised and added in here, and I think I would definitely agree with the majority of them. I think there is a recommendation for this report. So the recommendation is that we accept the proposed approaches. So that's to developing a Swansea Council sustainable food policy and supporting the wider Swansea County with regard to sustainable food. I do believe we added that caveat at the beginning with the addition of creating that working group. Or I think that's what we would call it, a working group. So including engagement then from what we've understood then. So more external partners across the board. And in addition to that, also maybe looking at how far this policy actually goes in terms of, I believe it was Councillor Lewis who mentioned, you know, it covers several cabinet portfolios. So having a look at what's been included in this, I think would be a good, maybe first working group meeting. So definitely.
Good.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay. So if there's nothing else to add there, I'm happy to ask if somebody could just propose the endorsement based on what the report we've seen in front of us and what we've added here this evening. Thank you, Councillor Lawson. And then if somebody could second that. Thank you, Councillor Keaton. And then all in favour? Okay, perfect. Just going then to item 5, which is the work plan. So our next meeting is being held on the 20th of March, Monday at 5:30. I know I said this last time in that last meeting, but I'm hoping, and we are hoping, the ongoing works then will be finished, and this will be in-person / hybrid meeting. And the item agenda then will be sustainable products, and as we've mentioned, I think there'll be a lot of rollover, I think, from what we've discussed this evening onto that one as well. Okay, so unless anybody has anything else to add, I'm happy to end the meeting.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.